Alright everyone, welcome back to School at Mr. McGee's house. We're actually in the basement today, which is perfect place to do today's lesson. Because if you think about it, a lot of times a basement is where people put things that they never think about again. Or they just put things in a basement and then forget about it. Well, we're going to be taking a look at the Russian Revolution. And not just the Russian Revolution, we're really focusing on Vladimir Lenin, the first communist leader of Russia. And why is that important? How does that connect to the basement? Well, a lot of people have forgotten about communist Russia. A lot of people forget how bad it was in Russia under communism. And you remember what we talked about with history. If you forget something that happened in history, then you won't learn the lessons of it. And so a lot of people know about terrible dictators like Adolf Hitler. A lot of people know about terrible dictators like Benito Mussolini in Italy. But if you ask people, hey, what about Vladimir Lenin and Joseph Stalin? A lot of people have no idea who those guys are or what they did in Russia. And it is very important that we actually learn who they are, what they did, and how did it affect the people of Russia, and how does it connect to events like World War I, World War II, and the Cold War. So we are going to go to the PowerPoint. We're going to take a look at Vladimir Lenin. You need to remember one thing. Remember when Vladimir Lenin takes over, what does he do? He pulls Russia out of World War I, and the Eastern Front is gone. And we said then, therefore, the Central Powers could concentrate on the Western Front, but the U.S. came in and Central Powers lose. But Russia pulls out because of the Communist Revolution and Vladimir Lenin taking over. All right. So, let's take a look at our PowerPoint. Alright guys? Ta-ta from the basement. Alright everybody, Vladimir Lenin. So let's take a look. As usual, when this happens, you won't see me, but I will obviously be talking about a lot of different things. And obviously you can pause the video at any time to write down notes. You're going to need to do that in order to write down notes, because those notes can be used on a test. So if we're going to understand a little bit about communism, let's take a look at Karl Marx. Now, who is Karl Marx? Karl Marx developed the theory of communism, and I don't mean communism as in, hey, we're going to have this utopia, the society in which everyone makes the same amount of money. That is communism. That's been around for thousands of years. But what we're talking about with Karl Marx is specifically a certain type of philosophy where everybody is in a group and nobody is seen as an individual. So it's kind of like this. I'm going to pick up the camera a second. You guys ready? Well, even if you aren't, I'm still picking up the camera. All right. So imagine this, a little bit dark in here, but imagine this. You have a society, and this was Karl Marx's theory. Karl Marx's theory was that society is broken into two groups. The first group are the wealthy. The business owners, anybody who's rich. And those people are evil. The second group are the working class people, the people who work in factories. They're poor, but they're working class is what that means. But they're going to be poor. They don't run anything. Those are the good people. Now, you should already be thinking to yourself, wait, there's a problem. Being rich doesn't make you good or bad. Being poor doesn't make you good or bad. So if you think about it, there are all sorts of rich people, business owners, who are really nice and really kind and really good and very moral people. There are all sorts of working class people who can be lazy and dishonest. Being working class or being rich doesn't make you good, or evil. Those are just, that just shows how much money you have. But in Karl Marx's theory, the idea was, if you're working class, that makes you bad. And if you're working class, that makes you good. If you're rich, that makes you bad. Well, and if you think about it, if you're not judging anybody by who they are as individuals, but instead you're saying, well, you're in this group and that makes you good, or if you're in this group that makes you bad, then you know what happens? The only moral in society is power. And so as long as you're taking power from the bad group, then you're okay. So you can do whatever you want to the bad group, and that's supposed to be good. So it doesn't matter if you're rich, it doesn't matter how kind you are, you're still considered evil. And if you're in the poor group, in other words, the working class group, it doesn't matter how many bad things you do, you're still good. Okay, now if you're thinking, wow, that's a terrible idea. People should be judged as individuals, not based on what group they're in. Well, you are correct. But now imagine that an entire country has that idea about people. They're not individuals. You don't judge them based on what that individual person does, but instead you judge them by what group they belong to. And imagine that an entire country is going to adopt that idea. Well, that is communism as a countrywide system. And so that is what we're going to see from Vladimir Lenin. And so that's why a lot of times you'll hear communism referred to as Marxism. The idea that people are not individuals, that they're in groups, and they're either in a good group or a bad group. And if you're in a bad group, you can do whatever you want. And if you're in a bad group, it doesn't matter how many good things you do. And if you're in a good group, you can do whatever you want. Doesn't matter how bad it is, and you're still considered good. So let's take a look. Now that we kind of understand a little bit about that, let's take a look at what happens in the Soviet Union when they adopt that system. Oh, and by the way, one of the things, if you're going to have this system in which people are in groups and the government has to take power from one group and give it to the other, well, guess what? That means that the government has to take over all businesses and run everything in society. And remember what we said about that? That doesn't work out well. You can refer back to some of my earlier videos on economics. Now, once Lenin takes over, first of all, we have Marxism that we talked about. Once Lenin takes over in the Soviet Union, once he takes over Russia, once the king, who's also called the Tsar, once he leaves and the communists take over and Russia becomes the Soviet Union, there's a civil war between the Red Army and the White Army. Now, that doesn't mean that literally the people were red in the Red Army and the people were white in the White Army. But what happened was from 1918 to 1920, you had a civil war in the Soviet Union. So Russia's become the Soviet Union, but now there's a civil war. The Red forces were those who were loyal to communism, who believed in communism. Again, think about it. The government takes over everything. The government owns everything. The people no longer can run their own businesses. And of course, we said before, the government also views people in terms of groups. And so that is, again, we already talked about that. So we'll kind of move on from there. But just remember that. Red equals communism. The white forces were those who were loyal to the monarch, who were loyal to the Tsar, and loyal to capitalism. Well, guess what? The Red Army wins, and once that happens, Lenin becomes the dictator of the Soviet Union. You know, when you have a country that embraces communism, there is no democracy. If you remember those two lines that we talked about, the government line and the economic line, well, if you remember what we talked about, remember we said, if you don't have any government freedom, you're not going to have any economic freedom. And vice versa, obviously. If you have government freedom, you'll have economic freedom. Well, think about it. If you have a country that's embraced communism, where there is no economic freedom, the government owns everything, the people are also not going to have any political or government freedom. So there's no democracy. So Lenin becomes a dictator during the Civil War. So during that Civil War that we talked about, Lenin nationalized all manufacturing and agriculture. Now, when you see that word, nationalized is not the same as nationalism. When we talk about nationalism, we say, oh, okay, nationalism, this is where you have a love for one's country and you're focused on your country and your country's culture and ethnicity and language and all that stuff that goes with it, and you're focused on your country and the people of your country. Okay, that's not nationalism. Nationalized means the government took over everything. So when you read, if Mr. McGee could actually put his words into a sentence, when you read that a dictator nationalized something, that means the government has taken it over. So Lenin nationalized all manufacturing and agriculture. That means all factories are now owned by the government in the Soviet Union. That means all farms are now owned by the government. So if you're a farmer, you don't own your farm. The government owns your farm, and now the government is telling you what farm you can work on and what you have to grow, and you have no choice in the matter. Also, the crops go to the government, and once the government does whatever it wants with the crops, you may or may not get some to feed your family. Manufacturing, you no longer own any factories. The government owns the factories, and therefore, if you're working in the factory, the government tells you what to make in the factory and how much to make, and it doesn't matter if you want to make that thing or not, you have to. Well, when you do this, when the government takes over farming and manufacturing, when the government takes over all business, the economy tends to go down because all decisions have to be made from the capital city or made from some person who works for the government, but they may not understand that factory. They may not understand what to produce or how to produce it. And if you remember, we talked earlier with communism. What did we say about communism? Because the government owns everything, I, as a person, I have no incentive. I have no reason to invent new things to make the business more productive. I have no incentive to invest in anybody else's business because I don't get to see any of the money. I get no reward. And so because of those things, the economy goes down. And you will see this in 7th grade. You guys will learn about China. You'll see that the communist leader of China, Mao Zedong, did the same thing in China, took over all farms. And what happens? The economy goes down, production goes down. So you don't grow as much food, and you don't manufacture as many products. And so if you look at the second bullet, the result was that 5 million Russians starved to death, about 5 to 6 million. Right? When you get into millions of people starving to death, nobody knows the exact number, but it's estimated about 5 to 6 million Russians starved to death. And you can see the news clipping there as well. So peasants' crops seized. That means that whatever crops were grown, the government came, took those crops, and sent those crops elsewhere, leaving the people with nothing. And so, again, 5 to 6 million Russians starved to death when Lenin took over. That took over the farms, I should say. All right, Lenin also created the Cheka, which are the secret police. Now, this is important for you to know. Whenever you have a dictator, whether it's Adolf Hitler, whether it's Mao Zedong in China, whether it's Fidel Castro in Cuba, in this case, Lenin in the Soviet Union, when you have a dictator that takes over and there's no democracy, the dictator normally creates a group called the secret police. Now, keep in mind, the secret police are not what you are thinking about as police. Regular police, hey, they have badges. Their job is to maintain law and order. So they make sure to protect you from criminals, bank robbers, murderers, drug dealers, things like that. That's the job of regular police. When you see the term secret police, the secret police don't care about robbers or drug dealers or murderers. That's not their job. The secret police's only job is to find anyone who disagrees with the government. In this case, disagrees with Lenin. Find anyone who disagrees with Lenin and kill them. Or arrest them. And when you get arrested by the secret police, nobody ever sees you again. So, when you ever have a dictator, the dictator always creates a secret police force whose only job is to silence anyone who speaks out against the dictator, speaks out against the government, or is willing to not obey the government. All right? That's why you have that second bullet. The goal of the Cheka, silence political disagreement from anyone. Well, this resulted in what's called the Red Terror. From September to October 1918, the Cheka executed the enemies of the state. You notice enemies is in quotes because enemies just meant anyone who wouldn't follow the Soviet government or who disagreed with Lenin. It is estimated that the Cheka executed 100,000 Russians. All right, so think about how many people were executed simply because they were seen as not agreeing or not going along with the government. So this was Lenin. This was Lenin's reign in the Soviet Union. Now, this isn't in the on the PowerPoint, by the way, this is a picture of a horse with a bunch of dead bodies in it. It's supposed to be, now nobody can verify for sure, it's supposed to be just dead bodies from executions. All right, as I said before, can't verify if that picture is correct, but that is a picture that is around that people say, hey, this is from the time with the Cheka. Now, you also had, by the way, this is something that we'll also talk about as well. We'll talk about this a little bit later, but the executions don't stop with Lenin's death. They will continue. And anybody who disagrees with the government, anyone who's seen to disagree with the government or suspected of disagreeing with the government or opposing the government, they'll disappear. Either they're sent to prison where you never see them again, or they're murdered. And so the Red Terror starts with Lenin. You also see what are called purges. And those purges, by the way, this is why, if you ever talk to me, people, kind of kids your age, will look at, oh, hey, you think, look at The Purge, you know, the movie The Purge. And what they don't realize is, no. The Purge, that word, when it comes to government just executing a lot of people, that happened in the Soviet Union. That's where we know that term from. So it's not some sort of fun horror movie or, hey, I don't like some political party in a democracy, and so, oh, they're going to purge us. No. This is what happens when you have a dictator and you have communism. And not just communism, you have a dictator of any stripe. You have these purges. So this is what happened in the Soviet Union. So under Lenin, under Stalin, you'd have these purges where anyone who was suspected or anyone who was a threat to Lenin, boom, they were just wiped out. And you had these show trials where they were forced to admit to crimes that they had not done. Right? So that is a result of the Red Terror and the purges of Lenin. All right? So Lenin suffered several strokes between 1922 and 1924. He would die January 21st, 1924. If you go to Moscow today, his body is embalmed so that it doesn't rot. And so he's in a glass coffin. You can actually go to Moscow, go to Lenin's tomb, and see the body of Lenin. Because, again, it's embalmed so it doesn't rot. Now, why do we need to know this about Lenin? Why do we need to know this about the Soviet Union? Well, because now that Lenin's dead, there's going to be a new dictator who takes over. And his name is Joseph Stalin. And by the time Joseph Stalin is done, he will have murdered more people than Adolf Hitler. And a lot of people don't know that. So we're going to talk, once we get into World War II, we're going to talk about Joseph Stalin and what life was like in the Soviet Union after Lenin. But in order to understand Joseph Stalin, to understand what the Soviet Union was like, we have to look at Lenin, we have to look at his reign. Now, what is your assignment? Your assignment, ladies and gentlemen, is to take a look at an article that I'm going to post on the module that you will have looked at. Mr. McGee could talk. If you look at the module that you clicked on to watch this video, look at that module. I'll have posted an article about Vladimir Lenin. Your job, this is a simple one for you. I want you to go in, read the entire article, and I want you to write down, what do you think are the 10 most important facts that someone should know about Vladimir Lenin and about what he did to take over Russia, okay? That's the key. What are the 10 most important things that you think, based on the article you read, that students should know about who Vladimir Lenin is, how he took over Russia? I'm going to add one more. What his beliefs were. So, you can pause, go back if you need to listen to those instructions. Type those 10 important facts from that article, type those up, send it to me. All right. Take care, guys. Bye.